From drunken antics to ruining his team's shot at greatness, Pat McAfee has seen some career highs and major personal lows. McAfee got married in 2020, tying the knot with his longtime girlfriend Samantha. The following year, however, she shared a heartbreaking social media post, revealing that they had not only recently endured a miscarriage, but that they had already had one due to an ectopic pregnancy that forced her to have one of her fallopian tubes removed. The second miscarriage came with some severe complications that resulted in surgeons removing her other fallopian tube, with Samantha tweeting, "They found I had internal bleeding again due to the pregnancy being in my tube, and it had burst. I needed emergency surgery to remove my remaining tube." In November 2022, however, the couple announced some joyous news in a joint Instagram post, revealing they were expecting their first child. The loss of her fallopian tubes led them to pursue in vitro fertilization, which was by no means an easy process. As Samantha shared in her post, she was able to conceive, quote, after about 150 shots, a surgery, a transfer, countless blood tests, waiting on embryos, genetic testing. While losing 2 babies was no doubt tragic for the couple, they had much to celebrate when, in May 2023, they announced the birth of their newborn daughter. During a June 2024 episode of his show, McAfee had some devastating news to share about someone very close to him.
My father-in-law passed away unexpectedly after the show ended yesterday in a hospital here in Indianapolis.
As McAfee explained, his wife's father had been hospitalized with an unspecified infection. The treatment that he'd been undergoing had seemingly been working, and his family was told he was on the mend and would be discharged within a few days. McAfee then detailed what happened next, saying, "We were all in high hopes with incredible optimism, and then yesterday, literally as the show was ending, my wife calls me and says that I have to get to the hospital because there had been an emergency." McAfee shared the wisdom that he'd taken from the tragic experience, noting that his wife was able to tell her father that she loved him before he passed. McAfee went on to say, "I think this is a nice piece of perspective and a moment to tell everybody, hey, tell your people you love them. You literally have no idea what's going to come." McAfee grew up playing soccer, developing a skill for kicking a ball great distances with pinpoint accuracy. As he grew older, he envisioned himself becoming a kicker in the NFL. McAfee was still in high school when the ambitious Pittsburgh teenager learned of a national kicking competition that was being held by college football scouts. McAfee knew he'd be able to nail it, but there was one big, seemingly insurmountable problem. The competition was being held in Miami, and it would cost him $1,500 to get there. That was $1,500 he didn't have, and his journey could have ended then and there. Rather than throw in the towel, however, McAfee instead hatched an audacious make-or-break scheme. According to the former kicker, he learned about a shady basement poker game with high stakes and big bets, and borrowed $100 from a friend and staked himself in the game, with the aim of walking out of there with enough to get him to Miami.
Dumb thought, blindly optimistic, pretty narcissistic as well, now that I think about it.
Yet, despite all odds, McAfee's gambit apparently worked. McAfee claims he won $1,400 at the game and made it to Miami, where he kicked 9 field goals, one after another, from increasingly further distances. That demonstration ultimately landed him a scholarship at West Virginia University. While playing college football for the West Virginia Mountaineers, McAfee proved to be a standout as a punter and kicker, demonstrating an impressive knack for field goals that hit their mark. That said, no kicker has an impeccable record, and McAfee's skills failed him during a crucial game at the worst possible moment. During a key 2007 game between the Mountaineers and the team's bitter rivals, the University of Pittsburgh Panthers, McAfee botched 2 ridiculously easy kicks. Those missed kicks contributed to the Mountaineers' 13-9 loss to the Panthers. That loss was not only embarrassing, but also cost the team an opportunity to play in that year's BCS championship game, which McAfee was confident WVU would win. After that loss, what had been a powerful college football team began to splinter, all of which rested on McAfee's shoulders. McAfee was pretty distraught, a situation that wasn't helped by the savage treatment he experienced from Mountaineers fans. That included death threats and disgruntled fans trashing his yard and vandalizing his car. McAfee has since called it easily one of the worst nights of his life.
And it just is a moment that I have tried to basically bury deep because of how much guilt I feel from what happened that evening.
feeling responsible for blowing the opportunity that could have led to his team playing for the championship, McAfee contemplated giving up completely. He considered dropping out of college and retreating into the shadows.
Thought about maybe disappearing, never being seen again after that. I was told it by a lot of people walking by our house.
Looking back on his despair, McAfee told Sports Illustrated that he felt so awful that he'd even flirted with the notion of ending it all, saying, "I didn't know if I wanted to live anymore. My life changed immediately that day. It was a terrible night, to be honest with you."
I hit rock bottom, I'd say, that evening.
He got in his car and drove, unsure whether he'd come back. Ultimately, he did, shouldering his responsibility for the loss and moving forward. 2 years later, he was drafted by the Indianapolis Colts. That marked the beginning of an NFL career, but it wasn't the end of his troubles. In October 2010, McAfee was picked up by cops when a woman called 911, claiming that a shirtless, dripping wet, and clearly intoxicated man was attempting to break into her car. When officers arrived on the scene and asked McAfee how much he'd had to drink, McAfee answered, "A lot, because I'm drunk." After sobering up in a jail cell, the next morning, McAfee called his father. As it turned out, his dad had already seen the headlines and promptly hung up on him. As McAfee told Indy Star in 2016, "At that moment, I just wanted to crawl into a hole and disappear." However, McAfee's arrest and the negative publicity it generated proved to have a silver lining. He said, "If it wasn't for that evening, I certainly wouldn't be in the NFL right now." He was forced into the realization that he was jeopardizing the career he'd worked so hard to achieve, with his arrest serving as a brutal wake-up call. While Pat McAfee's self-destructive behavior could have cut short his career in the NFL, there were other factors that were also contributing to that same outcome. In 2017, after 8 years with the Colts, McAfee announced that he was retiring. During an appearance on an Indianapolis radio station, McAfee revealed that the joints in his legs were essentially shot, saying, "I mean, my brain and my shoulders are good because I don't play a hand-to-hand combat position in the NFL, but my knees and joints have just been beat up." He theorized that all the soccer he'd played in his youth had also contributed to his knee's deterioration. Speaking about his retirement on the Dan Patrick Show, McAfee confirmed that the condition of his knees had grown so bad that he'd already undergone surgery, with more on the horizon.
The last half of the season, I couldn't really walk much on days that I kicked. I just go home and lay in bed and ice my knees. I felt like a 90-year-old man.
After his retirement from the NFL, McAfee began carving out a career in the world of podcasting, first with Barstool Sports, before moving his podcast to other outlets. McAfee had a firm belief that he'd be an asset as a football analyst on televised games, insistent that he could bring a lot to the table with commentary that was as entertaining as it was informed. However, the executives who ran the sports division of American television networks thought differently. As McAfee told The Hollywood Reporter, "I had a guy who was a pseudo-agent for me who reached out to the networks, and that pseudo-agent texted me back within like 10 minutes that there is zero interest from any of the TV networks." That kind of scorched-earth rejection would level most people, and it stuck with McAfee. He said, "It put another chip on my shoulder. Do I hold any grudges against anybody in the past who didn't hire me? Absolutely." He decided to get himself an actual agent, which ultimately led to a series of multi-million-dollar contracts, culminating with his 2023 deal with ESPN, reportedly worth a hefty $85 million. Speaking about the executives who passed him over, McAfee promised his own form of retribution, declaring, "It's my job to make them look very dumb in 5 to 10 years. McAfee would be the first to concede that he's unapologetically outspoken, something that his fans like, but that also garners occasional controversy. While he has brushed up against the latter on many occasions, he took it to a whole other level with some remarks he made about fellow NFL retiree Brett Favre. At the time, Favre was accused of engineering a scheme in which millions of dollars that had been earmarked as funds for families in need were shuttled to a volleyball facility utilized by his daughter. During an episode of The Pat McAfee Show, McAfee weighed in on news stories about Favre's shady side.
Well, Brett shouldn't have stole from the people, Brett.
Subsequently, AP reported that Favre sued McAfee for defamation. In his suit, Favre claimed that McAfee had accused Favre of, quote, stealing from poor people in Mississippi. In subsequent episodes of his show, McAfee detailed the bizarre experience of being sued by the legendary quarterback, recalling how he'd been served by an apologetic process server. McAfee claimed that Favre's intention was, quote, to bankrupt me. Ultimately, though, Favre and McAfee buried the hatchet and settled the lawsuit. While McAfee is best known for his near decade in the NFL, he's also passionate about soccer. That came into play when he happened upon a televised broadcast of the soccer tournament. McAfee became so enamored that he put together his own team and entered it into the 2024 tournament. McAfee then announced that he'd be playing on that team. Not surprisingly, McAfee's fans were chomping at the bit to watch him in action on the soccer pitch, to say nothing of seeing him face off with fellow NFL retiree J.J. Watt, part owner of Britain's Burnley FC soccer team. Sadly, that matchup never came to be, with McAfee revealing that he was out of commission due to a hip flexor that was either strained or full-on torn. McAfee announced the sad news of his injury via a tongue-in-cheek social media post, masquerading as a news report. Citing a source, McAfee tweeted about his injury occurring during a kick while playing Burnley FC that, quote, missed the net by 40 to 50 yards. McAfee continued writing, the source would go on to say, Pat was unable to stand up from the toilet this morning without some rather excruciating pain. This is what 37 years old looks like for a guy who hasn't run in a few decades.